Okay, welcome back. I had the form inside the shop, the silicone's nice and dry, so now we're ready to pour the concrete into the form. But before we get to that step, let's talk about this wire mesh that's sitting in front of me. This I got from Home Depot for under $11. It's a 4x7 foot piece, 1/8 inch thick steel. The reason why you want to use this wire mesh on the inside of your concrete is to give it strength. Now when you go to move it out of your mold or move it to its final resting place, it could crack in half. So this skeleton structure that you're putting inside the concrete prevents that from happening. Now I'm going to cut it with a grinder with a metal cutting blade on the end of it. If you don't have this, you can use a hacksaw. It will just take you more time, but they are inexpensive tools to use for this project. Now for the sizing, you want this just to fit on the inside of your form, and you'll see that more clearly at the concrete portion of our build. So let's get cutting and then we'll get to the concrete. Okay, so the concrete I'm using is high strength concrete mix. Now each bag should have a note somewhere telling you how much a single bag of concrete will yield. And in this case, it's 0.45 cubic feet. And then below that, it gives you a formula to determine how many bags you need for your project. Now I wrote mine down on a piece of paper. So following their formula, I take 5 feet times 1 foot times 2 inches, which gives me 10. And then I take 10 divided by 12, I get 0.833, divide that by 0.45, which gives me just under 2 bags I need to complete my project. Okay, now on to mixing concrete. This might be the most stressful part of someone's project because they don't know how much water to put in their concrete. Now the bag states 2.5 quarts, but if you use 2.5 quarts in this, you're gonna have a very dry concrete mix. And if you use that, you might have air pockets showing on the top side of your concrete when you take it out of the form. So I tend to use 3.5 to 4 quarts. Might be a little more, might be a little less. It just depends on if I get the correct consistency that I want, which I'm looking for like peanut butter or pancake batter. So I'll mix this up and then I'll show you what the consistency is to use to pour into your form. Okay, so this is the consistency that you want for your concrete. Nice and running, but not overly running. Okay, now we'll go put it inside the form. Okay, so real quick before we pour the concrete into the form, we want to make sure and give it one last cleaning with some alcohol or water. I just like using alcohol because it dries super quick. Just make sure you do this and get anything else that could be in here, sawdust, any type of bugs that might have flown in overnight. You don't want that showing up on your finished concrete pad. Make sure you get the edges too really well. Let that dry and then we're ready to pour the concrete in. Okay, so I brought the concrete inside here. I'm gonna throw it inside of here with my hands. I wanna make sure and pack it down into the corners and put like a 1-inch layer on the bottom side of here. After I get 1-inch layer on here, I'm gonna use my wire mesh that I cut before and then put that on top. Oh, that's the perfect consistency. Okay, so after you get about a 1-inch layer of concrete down in your form, just take your hand and just pat it down all the way around and make sure you get into those corners. You don't want any air pockets to be showing. We'll shake it out a little bit later and then we'll get more of the air pockets out of there, but you want to just make sure and go all around this, take your time and make sure there's no air bubbles coming up. Okay, so after you think you got most of the air bubbles out of that bottom surface of the concrete, take your skeleton structure and just stick it in the middle of the concrete here. Now we're going to add the rest of the concrete. I have to do one more bag. put the rest of the concrete on the top of this, and then do the same thing we just did before, get most of your air bubbles out of there, and then we're ready to finish it up. Okay, so after you're done patting all this concrete on the top surface here, I want you to take and use these handles. So that's why I put these handles on here. So these handles are going to work really well to help shake the concrete like this to get any trapped air out of the bottom of the form. So go ahead and do this to both sides. And you'll see little air bubbles come up from the bottom. So then just take your hand again and go around like this and get everything nice and smooth and looking good. Now once you feel like you think you got most of those air bubbles out, you can take a mallet and you can bang the sides like this if you want as well. This will also help get air out of your concrete. Don't whack it too hard, but whack it hard enough where it will just help air come up from the bottom. Okay, now that that's done, take a straight edge, a straight piece of wood. This is just a piece of melamine that I cut off of the form the other day. And you're going to use this and you're going to level this surface. So you're going to get a lot of concrete coming up, which is fine. You can go back and forth, you can go like this. Just however you got to do to get it nice and smooth on top. This top side doesn't really matter too much because this is going to be the bottom of your form. So I can tell I have a bunch more on this side versus this side. So I'm going to bring some of the thicker material up this way. Not a problem. There we go. You have a lot of time to work with this, so don't be too worried about time or the concrete drying. Okay, so once you're done pouring in the concrete, getting all the air bubbles out, screening off the top, let it dry for about 2 to 3 days, and then once it's dried, we'll come back and we'll take it out of the mold and see how she turned out. Okay, welcome back. It's been about 3 days since we poured the concrete, but before we take it out of the form, I want you to just take your hand and go down this entire surface here and mark with a marker with an X any high spots that you might think will be a problem at its final resting place. I have 2 here. I'm going to take my grinder and just quick knock them down, and then we'll get on to taking it out of the form. Okay, just got those high surfaces knocked down, and now we're going to take it out of the form. So as you see, it's on a piece of plywood. There's 2 reasons why I did this. The first reason is when we go to shake the air out of the bottom of the form, it gives it a smooth surface to shake because the melamine kind of glides on that plywood. The second reason for it is because it allows me to move the concrete slab to the edge so I can put a tool underneath it. I have a crow's foot that will help me lift it up this direction. I don't have to in this case because it does provide me a lip to put my fingers underneath, So after you get it to the edge, just take 2 pieces of spare wood. And we're going to gently lift this up and then put it down on top of the wood. You might feel it start to pop out a little bit. Don't get your finger stuck in there. Okay, so now it's on the piece of wood. So now we'll take off the top piece. Okay, so now it's on the top side. And now to take it out of the mold, you might have noticed when you were taking it and flipping it over, you might have felt the concrete start to release out of the form, which is what you want. Now, to do this properly, you should have 2 people, one this side and one this side, and rock very slowly back and forth, and it should come up in one piece. I don't have 2 people, so I need to bring one side up and just put like a shim, whatever you have underneath it, to hold this side up, and then do the same for this side. If this does not work, you can also take and release these screws and just pop off the trim on the sides to reveal your mold. So let's try this method. Just a little bit at a time. There we go. Pop loose. Make sure you take it off nice and evenly. Okay, so we just released the form. Now just take a brush, just brush off any pieces that might have flaked off from inside the form or outside the form, and then we'll inspect and see how she looks. Okay, so as you notice, it's a lot darker on this top side of the melamine. That's because it wasn't exposed to air as much. So this will definitely dry overnight and it will lighten up like actual concrete color, that light gray. Okay, so I want to kind of give you a close-up view of what the concrete looks like. The top is very smooth, not a single hole in it. The edging does have some pitting, some holes, which is easy to take out. The corners look good. Okay, so overall I'm pleased. It turned out just the way I wanted it to. Concrete is naturally imperfect, so all these little holes I might just keep because it actually gives it some character, but there's not very many there. I could take cement and I could just fill those holes in and take some fine sandpaper and grind it down flat. You won't even notice. But what I am going to do, I'm going to let it dry tonight, and then tomorrow I'm going to come through with a fine piece of sandpaper and just sand up these corners a little better on these edges, and then she's ready to put in place. Okay, it's been one night since we took it out of the concrete form, and now the final step before we can put it in its final resting place is just to give it a light sanding over everything. I'm using 800 grit sheets of sandpaper. This you can use wet or dry, and I use this to do all the top side surfaces, so the corners, the edges, anything that looks like it might be a little rough from coming out of the form, that will clean it up nice. And then the last, I'll use 220 grit sanding block, and for this I'll use on the underside to make that into nice straight lines to get all those flakes of concrete off that were stuck on the form. So just run through, get all this nice and cleaned up, and then we'll look at the final product. Okay, I just spent about 15 minutes giving this whole top surface a nice light sanding along with the sides, the edges, and the corners. So the project now is officially completed. I'll be moving this to a client's house next week to put on an outdoor propane fireplace. Remember, this thing weighs 120 pounds because I use 2 60-pound bags, so save your back, grab a friend, and have them help you move it into place. For color options, real quick, the client is going to stain the concrete pad a different color, but if you don't want to use stain, you could use the dry mixture that you put into each concrete pad pour. So these come in black, tan, grays, greens, blues, whatever you want, but make sure you use the same mixture for each pour, because if you don't, you'll have inconsistencies, but since concrete's imperfect in the first place, it might look cool with different shades throughout your concrete. Again, this cost me under $65, 2 hours worth of work, and 5 days of dry time. So really minimal work, but a great product at the end. Thanks for watching the video. Comment down below any questions you might have, like the channel, and subscribe if you want. Until the next video, thanks for watching.